My father's secrets were buried deeper than his coffin. When they lowered him into the earth that morning, the air carried a sweetness of lavender from the roses Mother had chosen. I am 61, and as I stand beside that open grave, the weight of years presses against my chest. To everyone else, he was a man of routine and decency. Clockwork precision, same tea at 6, same silent nod before bed. To me, he was something quieter, almost unknowable. I tell myself that grief has its own logic, that remembering his workshop's warmth might soften what's coming. The house hums with the aftersound of condolences, cups clinking, murmured sympathies, the shuffle of shoes on hardwood floors. In the corner of my eye, I see his old tools still hanging, untouched since the day his hands grew too tired to shape wood. The scent of sawdust clings to the curtains. The ticking clock from his workbench marks each passing second like an accusation, each tick echoing the time I didn't spend asking him what he was hiding. I walk to the casket one last time before they seal it. The satin lining glints faintly beneath the church light. My fingertips trace its smooth edge, then hesitate as something catches. A corner of an envelope peeks out, creased, yellowed, deliberate. My breath tightens. I slide it free, unnoticed amid the whispers around me. The handwriting across its front is his, unmistakably steady. For her eyes only. Back home, I sit by the window. The evening light settles soft across the walls. Outside, the garden he tended sways gently, each petal moving as if breathing. I break the seal of the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside is a single page. No greeting, no farewell. Just his confession, written in a tone more grave than any sermon he'd ever respected. If you find this, it means I failed to set things right. What I built was not wholly mine. I took from another to give you peace. Forgive me. They will come for what's left. My stomach twists. I read it twice, 3 times, searching for another meaning. There isn't one. The handwriting dips near the end, as if his hand had grown weak. The lavender from the roses still lingers, but now it mixes with the metallic tang of dread. I whisper, "What did you do, Father?" But the room gives no answer. Just the creak of the old chair, the faint hum of the refrigerator, and the soft rattle of wind against the glass. The walls feel closer than they did an hour ago. My life, once wrapped neatly around his quiet strength, begins to unravel thread by thread. I glance at the letter again. There's a faint watermark, some kind of banking emblem, and at the bottom, a sequence of letters and numbers, almost like a reference code. I don't understand what it's tied to, but I recognize one thing, the name Mark, my cousin. The same cousin who offered help with funeral costs and smiled too easily when the lawyer read the will. The same cousin who asked me more than once whether Father had mentioned anything before he passed. The clock ticks louder. I remember my father's last look at me in the hospital, the one he tried to turn into comfort but failed. "Keep the house safe," he'd whispered. I thought he meant the roof and the walls. Maybe he meant something deeper, something buried, something owed. I fold the letter carefully and place it inside the drawer of his old desk, under the wooden ring he carved for my mother decades ago. The ring feels rough now, the varnish worn thin, its once perfect circle marred by time. My hand stays there, motionless, until I feel the resolve harden in me. I speak aloud, to no one. Whatever this is, I'll find it, even if it breaks what's left of us. Outside, the street lamps bloom pale against the dusk. The light flickers once, as though uncertain whether to hold. I take it as a sign. Secrets don't rest in peace. They rise. The scent of lavender returns, faint but certain, drifting from the roses on the windowsill. Beneath that calm, I sense the beginning of something else, something restless, waiting to surface. I close the drawer, hearing the wood click into place, and feel the weight of the letter settle inside my chest like a second heartbeat. The letter wasn't meant for me. Grief makes liars of everyone who smiles at your door. By the second week after Father's burial, the stream of visitors had thinned to a trickle, but pity lingered like perfume in the hallway. Every knock sounded softer, as if they feared the echo of morning itself. I had just set 2 cups of tea on the table when the bell rang again. Through the frosted glass, I saw a figure shifting his weight. Thomas, one of Father's former colleagues. He'd been at the funeral, standing 2 pews back, hands folded, like a man carrying someone else's guilt. He smiled as I opened the door, a smile too polished for sorrow. "I was in the neighborhood," he said, shaking off rain. "Thought you might need company." I let him in, though the chill that followed felt older than weather. He looked around the room, at the photographs, the clock, the empty chair, cataloging everything as if the house itself were evidence. "I can't imagine what you're going through," he said. "Your father was precise." His pause landed like a question he wasn't ready to voice. "Precise," I echoed, pouring tea. "Yes, everything had a place." He watched my hands as I reached for the sugar. The letter I'd found sat hidden in the drawer behind him, its weight heavy in my mind. Rain began to tap harder against the window, steady and patient. "Did he leave anything unusual?" he asked, lowering his voice. I met his gaze, forcing calm. "Just memories." His smile faltered. "You were always honest," he said, as though testing the statement. For a moment, silence filled the space between us, thick, deliberate. The kind that doesn't comfort, only waits. Then he added, "Sometimes the dead leave trouble behind. Papers, confusions. It's better to let things rest." I sipped the tea to steady myself, though it had gone cold. "Trouble," I said quietly. "Funny word for love." He blinked, unsure whether I meant it as defense or challenge. He didn't stay long. The visit ended with awkward politeness, his umbrella dripping on the mat. When the door closed, the echo of his shoes lingered in the hall. I stood there, staring at the lock, the scent of wet wool fading slowly. An hour later, I noticed the phone flashing. 3 missed calls from an unknown number, same time each evening, just after dusk. No message, no voice. I opened the call log. Entry 27A9. Time stamped 7:42 p.m., the same number Father used once in his hospital records. My stomach turned cold. That night, the rain didn't stop. It pressed against the roof like something trying to get in. I couldn't sleep. The clock in the hall marked every minute, cruelly precise, as if Father's discipline had followed me into the dark. When morning came, the world outside smelled of wet soil and guilt. I walked to the porch, wrapped in a shawl, and found a small white envelope under the step. No handwriting, no seal. Inside, a folded scrap of newspaper, an obituary circled in blue ink. Not Father's, but a man from his old firm. Died 3 days before him. Cause, undisclosed. I pressed the paper flat on the table. The ink had bled from the rain, but one word remained legible: audit. By evening, I couldn't ignore the unease anymore. I called the number from the log. It rang twice, then silence. On the 3rd attempt, a voice finally answered, low and calm. "You shouldn't have opened it," he said. "Who is this?" The line crackled, but the voice continued. "He tried to fix what was broken. Now they'll want it back." The call ended before I could breathe. I stared at the receiver, my heart hammering. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, faint but growing. The next morning, the workplace committee sent flowers with a note. "We're here for you if you need anything." The words looked like kindness, but read like surveillance. The same organization that once praised Father's integrity now watched his daughter for signs of disobedience. By dusk, I closed every curtain in the house. The rain returned, tapping the windows like a metronome set to dread. The phone stayed silent until midnight, when it rang once, just once, and stopped. The number called me again after midnight. Inheritance can bless or bury. That's what I kept hearing in my head as I sat across from the bank clerk, watching his hands tremble over the papers. The fluorescent light above us hummed, harsh and cold, flickering just enough to make everything feel uncertain. He pushed the folder toward me with the care of a man handling something dangerous. The paper was thick, its grain rough beneath my fingertips, carrying the faint smell of ink and dust. Proof that money, too, has a scent when guilt stains it. He cleared his throat. "This statement was issued 2 days before your father passed," he said. His tone tried to stay professional, but the wobble gave him away. "It shows a withdrawal of $12,400 and $36,000 unaccounted." My pulse stuttered. "Unaccounted?" I whispered. He nodded, his eyes darting toward the security camera in the corner. "It happens sometimes, ma'am. Oversights, transfers, we're checking the records." But I knew it wasn't an oversight. Not when the next page bore a signature that wasn't my father's. The letters were sharp where his were curved, impatient where his had been measured. I didn't need a handwriting expert to tell me. It was Mark's. My cousin's hand, pretending to steady the family legacy while stealing from it. I took a breath, the paper grain biting slightly at my skin. "Can I get a certified copy of this record?" The clerk hesitated, glancing at the bank manager's door. "I'll need approval." "Then get it," I said, softer than I meant to. "Please." 10 minutes later, I was sitting in the lawyer's office, rain streaking the window glass like cracks on a mirror. The estate lawyer, Diane, looked up from the papers I'd laid on her desk. She adjusted her glasses, reading in silence for what felt like hours. The clock ticked once, twice. Finally, she sighed. This changes things," she said. "Are you sure you want to go further with it? Once we file a notice, it becomes public record." I met her gaze. "He stole from my father before the coffin even settled. I'm not letting it disappear." She leaned back, eyes narrowing with something between respect and worry. "Then we'll need to issue a formal notice. Banking Fraud Division, Family Estate Board, all of it." As she typed, the rhythmic tapping of her keys filled the room, a sound sharp and final, each keystroke a nail in the coffin of the version of my family I used to believe in. She printed the document, an official record, reference ID. Case 14B9 FD. She handed it to me with both hands. "Sign here to authorize." I did. My name, shaking but legible. The ink felt like a boundary drawn in blood. That evening, I received my first message from Mark. Short, cruel. "You've lost your mind. Stop humiliating yourself." He'd attached a family photo from years ago, all of us smiling under summer light. The caption, "Remember what peace looks like?" I stared at that image for a long time. The faces blurred in my vision until all I saw was betrayal wearing a Sunday smile. When Diane called later, she said the bank's fraud division had acknowledged the complaint. "They'll initiate the process," she told me. "You'll need to be ready for pushback." Pushback came faster than she expected. Within 24 hours, whispers began circling through town. At the cafe, at church, even in the grocery line. "Poor thing," I overheard one woman say. "Grief does strange things to the mind." Mark's smear campaign had begun, painting me as unstable, vindictive, fragile. It was almost elegant in its cruelty. I didn't argue. Not yet. Let them talk. Let them weigh his charm against my silence. The truth would outlast both. By dusk, I placed the ledger on my father's old desk, the one he built from oak decades ago. The paper rasped as I smoothed it flat, my reflection wavering in the glass frame above. The old wooden ring sat beside it, a circle unbroken, even when the hands that carved it were gone. I touched its surface, whispered under my breath, "You wanted this house safe, Father. Then it starts here." Outside, thunder rumbled, distant but growing. I folded the certified bank statement, slid it into a folder marked Estate, reference D3L5, and locked it away. The air in the room felt heavier, as though the house itself had exhaled a warning. The next morning, Diane sent a short confirmation email. Formal notice filed at 9:02 a.m., Banking Division acknowledgement pending. Simple words, but they sealed my resolve. The ledger now carried two truths, one written in numbers and one in betrayal. Both bore Mark's fingerprints, and as I stared at the signature again, the ink thick and accusing, one thought settled like a nail in my chest. Mark's name shouldn't have been on that paper. Some faces age, others vanish by intention. The dusk light slipped through the curtains as I cleaned out Father's desk, the one with the shallow drawer that always jammed halfway. Dust gathered around the edges like ash, and the air smelled faintly of old varnish and something else, something sour, almost secret. I'd gone through most of his papers already. Receipts, letters, bank statements, a few forgotten sketches. But the bottom drawer resisted, as if it wanted to stay locked in time. When it finally gave way, the sound was soft, almost apologetic. Inside lay a photograph, tucked beneath a yellowed folder. I pulled it out, expecting another family portrait, one of those stiff, posed ones from my childhood. But the faces staring back weren't ours. It was my mother, younger, laughing, her hand resting on the shoulder of a man who wasn't my father. For a long time, I couldn't move. The quiet in the room pressed against me like another presence. My fingers traced the edge of the photo, and the light from the window hit it at just the right angle, revealing handwriting across the back. It was my father's. Forgive before it reaches her. The words felt heavy, almost alive. Forgive what? Before what reached me? Grace arrived just after sundown. She'd been my constant, steady voice, calm hands, the only person who didn't treat me like a fragile relic of grief. She took one look at the photograph and exhaled slowly. "That's not your father," she said, her tone careful. "No," I answered, "but it's his handwriting." She turned the photo in her fingers, her expression darkening under the fading light. "Secrets rot the living faster than the dead," she said quietly. "Whatever this is, don't let it swallow you." I tried to smile, but it didn't last. It already has. Grace placed the picture back on the desk, aligning it perfectly with the edge, her small act of control in a world coming undone. "What will you do?" "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but I can't pretend I didn't see it." She nodded, though her eyes betrayed concern. "Then start with boundaries. Don't share anything else with him." She didn't need to say Mark's name. His presence had been growing like mold, silent, spreading, unavoidable. That evening I wrote an email to Diane, the lawyer, formally withdrawing consent for shared access to the estate records. I hit send, the click of the mouse echoing like a verdict. Boundary set. The line drawn in quiet defiance. By morning, I'd learned how fast word travels in small towns. Grace called, voice tight with anger. "He's been talking," she said. "Mark told the church committee you're confused, that grief's making you imagine things." "He's trying to scare you off," I said. "I'm not scared," she answered. But I heard the hesitation, the first fracture in her steady tone. Later that day, she stopped by again, cheeks flushed from the cold. "They asked me if you'd been taking medication," she said, pacing the living room. "They're making it sound like you're unstable. You know what that does here." I did. In a town where gossip moved faster than wind, character was currency. Lose it, and you'd never buy it back. I looked toward the mirror on the wall, one of Father's old antiques, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw my mother's reflection instead of mine. Her smile, that same tilt of the chin, it was gone before I could breathe. I took the photo again and held it near the window. The surface caught the last light of dusk, revealing faint cracks along the edges. The paper felt newer than the others I'd found. Glossy, recent, not the relic of decades past. And the man beside her, he was wearing a wristwatch model released only a few years ago. A chill moved through me. If the photo was new, it meant someone wanted it found, someone alive wanted to reopen a wound. The next call from Mark came before nightfall. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. "Harder for who?" I asked. "For everyone," he replied. "Stop digging. You don't know what you're looking at." "Maybe not," I said, steadying my voice. "But I know what I see." The line clicked dead. Grace, standing near the doorway, whispered, "He's not bluffing this time." I turned the photo over once more, running my thumb along the handwriting. Forgive before it reaches her. Maybe Father hadn't been warning me about the past. Maybe he was warning me about what was still coming. As the room dimmed, the light from the window thinned to a fragile orange line across the floor. The drawer stood open beside me, its emptiness louder than words. I tucked the photograph inside again, feeling its edges catch against the wood. And as I closed it, one thought settled deep in my chest. The photo was newer than his death. Truth often arrives before the sun does. The knock came just as the horizon began to glow faintly behind the curtains. 3 firm raps, measured, official, and nothing like the hesitant visits of neighbors bringing sympathy pie. I froze halfway down the hall, the floorboards creaking beneath my bare feet. Through the frosted glass, I saw the silhouettes of 2 figures, their outlines crisp against the morning light. When I opened the door, the taller one lifted his badge. "Sergeant Hale," he said, voice steady, polite. "We need a few minutes of your time." The other officer nodded, but kept his eyes scanning the hallway behind me. The air smelled of rain-soaked asphalt and cold metal, the scent of something larger than grief making its way inside. I gestured for them to come in. Hale stepped over the threshold, careful not to track mud on the rug. He looked around briefly, eyes settling on the framed photograph above the mantel. "This was your father's home?" he asked. "Yes," I said quietly, "and mine now, at least on paper." He took out a thin file, edges worn, and set it on the table. The sound it made was light but final, like a door closing somewhere far away. "We're conducting a routine inquiry into the handling of estate funds," he said. "A formal complaint was filed through the bank's fraud division 2 days ago. Reference entry F219C. The number meant nothing to me, but the implication did. The case was real. My choice to step forward had left the realm of whispers. It now lived in ink and authority. Hale's tone softened. "I understand this can feel invasive. We're not here to accuse you of anything. We just need to verify signatures and transfer details before we escalate to a full audit." I nodded, forcing calm. "If there's something to find, it won't come from me." He flipped open the file. Inside were photocopies of forms I hadn't seen before, some familiar, others with lines added after Father's death. The date stamps caught my attention first. 2 withdrawals, both under Mark's initials. Hale noticed where I was looking. "We've cross-checked these against the bank's internal records. There are inconsistencies." My chest tightened. "You think he forged them?" He paused before answering. "We're not drawing conclusions yet, but we flagged 3 signatures for analysis." The second officer remained near the window, jotting notes. His pen scratched rhythmically against the paper, steady as a heartbeat. The sound filled the silence until Hale continued. "You'll likely receive a formal request to appear for a statement. It's standard procedure for witnesses." "Witness," I repeated softly. The word felt fragile, like it could shatter under breath. I glanced toward the hallway where Father's study waited in shadows. I could still hear his voice in memory, weak, fractured from illness. "Keep the house safe." At the time, I'd thought he meant property, walls, land. Now I knew better. He meant truth. The officers asked to see any correspondence or financial records left behind. I led them to the study, pulling open drawers one by one, laying out what little I'd found: ledgers, receipts, his last letter. Hale examined them with patience, nodding occasionally. "You kept everything organized," he said. "That'll help us." "I wasn't looking to help an investigation," I said. "I was looking for peace." He gave a sympathetic smile, though his eyes betrayed the exhaustion of a man who'd seen too many families implode over inheritance. "Peace rarely comes before paperwork," he murmured. As they prepared to leave, Hale stopped at the door. "One more thing," he said. "There's been a counter-complaint filed against you. Intimidation and defamation, reference entry M338B, filed by a relative, I believe." My throat went dry. "Mark." He nodded. I can't discuss the details, but you should be aware. These cases tend to get layered. Don't engage directly. Let it play out through the proper channels." "I'm not afraid of him," I said. "Good," Hale replied. "Just be careful whose silence you interpret as safety." The sound of their footsteps faded down the porch, crisp against the damp concrete. I stood in the doorway long after they were gone, watching the street glow under the pale light of morning. Somewhere, a bird began to call, sharp and lonely. Inside, the case file lay open where Hale had left it. My name on one page, Father's on another, Mark's looping signature in between, bridging lives it never had the right to touch. I ran my finger across the ink, feeling the indentation of each stroke. Later that afternoon, Diane called to confirm the police had officially opened the inquiry. "You're listed as witness," she said. "It's a good sign. They're taking it seriously." I tried to sound grateful, but my voice trembled. "He won't stop," I whispered. "He'll find another way." "Then we'll meet him there," she said simply. That night, I placed Father's letter back in its drawer, beside the badge Hale had accidentally left, a small metal token, temporary proof that truth had entered my home. The floor creaked softly as I walked away, every step echoing through the quiet house. The next morning, I received a call from an unknown number. A low voice on the other end said only one thing before hanging up. They said the signatures weren't all forged. The metal key burned colder than any secret. It sat heavy in my palm as the bank clerk led me down the corridor, each fluorescent light flickering with that sterile rhythm only institutions possess, indifferent to grief, yet perfectly timed for it. The chamber door groaned open, releasing a wave of cold air that clung to my skin. It smelled faintly of metal and dust, a chill that reached bone rather than flesh. The clerk gestured to the narrow booth, where the deposit boxes waited like silent jurors. I slid the key into the lock. It resisted at first, then gave with a click that echoed too loud for the small room. The drawer slid forward, long and gray, the kind that could hold both inheritance and betrayal without distinction. Inside lay an envelope, sealed and brittle at the edges, and beside it a folded stack of receipts tied neatly with a thin red string. The lawyer, Diane, stood just behind me. She was the only person the court still trusted to act as intermediary, my reluctant arbiter. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her glasses. "Whenever you're ready," she said, though her tone carried the weight of knowing that readiness was a myth. I untied the string and spread the receipts across the table. 4 of them, neatly dated within a 3-week window. Each listed the same branch, same signature, different amounts, $12,000, $9,500, $14,000, and $13,000. The total struck me before the math did, $48,500. My father's missing money. Every line was initialed in Mark's handwriting, the same slanted M I'd seen 100 times on old holiday cards. Beneath the receipts, half a document peeked out, torn clean across the middle. I unfolded it carefully. It was the top half of my father's will, his name, the seal, the first paragraph intact. The lower section was missing, the part that named beneficiaries. My pulse thudded in my ears. Diane leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. "Where's the rest of it?" "I don't know," I said. "Maybe he destroyed it, or someone else did." She looked at the receipts again. If these are legitimate withdrawals, they'd correspond with bank reference B147A. That's the same period we flagged. She reached for her phone, snapping a picture for the official record. "This matches the missing trail exactly." I stared at the torn edge of the will, its fibers uneven, almost violent. "He wanted this hidden," I said. "Not lost, hidden." Diane hesitated. "Then he must have known who was looking for it." Silence stretched between us, thick as frost. The hum of the security system pulsed faintly through the walls, an institutional heartbeat. For a moment, I could almost hear Father's voice, weary but clear, "Keep the house safe." But now, even the house felt like evidence. As we packed the contents back into the envelope, Diane's composure cracked. "I've seen greed before," she said quietly. "But this is premeditated theft." "From family," I added. "The kind that smiles while it's taking." We left the vault room, the metal door closing with a sound that reminded me of finality itself. Back upstairs, the branch manager awaited us with a forced smile and a clipboard. "We'll need to retain these items for verification," he said. "Bank protocol." His eyes didn't quite meet mine. Diane nodded sharply. "Understood. But you'll issue a freeze on both accounts until the estate dispute is resolved." "Of course," he replied, "effective immediately." Outside, the air was brighter than I remembered. People hurried past, oblivious to the quiet wars fought in marble corridors. Diane handed me a printed acknowledgement receipt, official reference ID F482C, stamped and dated. I tucked it inside my coat pocket, feeling the paper's cold stiffness against my fingers. By the time I reached home, my phone had begun buzzing relentlessly. Dozens of alerts, messages, and one email subject line that made my stomach drop. Estate ledger. Proof she lied. Mark had struck first. Someone had uploaded edited versions of Father's financial records online, removing his own signature, replacing dates, distorting the numbers. The caption beneath the shared post read, "Some people will destroy family to steal what's not theirs." I stared at the screen, pulse hammering. Grace texted moments later, "Don't respond yet. Let Diane handle it." I didn't reply. I just walked to Father's desk and laid the real receipts beside the torn will, aligning them perfectly under the lamplight. The ink shimmered faintly in the cold reflection. Proof and memory, side by side. For the first time, I realized what scared Mark most. It wasn't exposure. It was record. Paper never dies quietly. It endures. I slipped the metal key into an envelope marked "Return Pending." My hand lingered on it, heavy with the chill from that vault. And as I sealed it, a small detail I'd missed before caught my eye. One of the receipts bore an unfamiliar name scrawled in the corner, my mother's maiden name, written in my father's handwriting. One receipt bore my mother's maiden name, Faith bends under the weight of rumor. The chapel smelled of incense and old wood, the kind of scent that settles into the soul like memory. I sat near the back, where light from the stained glass fractured across the pews in soft colors that felt unearned. Every Sunday had once been comfort, routine, forgiveness. But that morning, it felt like trial. The murmurs started before the hymn ended, whispers that moved like wind through leaves, too soft to catch, too sharp to ignore. Pastor Bennett stepped up to the pulpit, voice smooth and practiced. "We must pray," he said, "for those among us who have lost their way." His eyes lifted briefly toward me, just long enough to brand the moment. "We pray for guidance, for humility, for repentance." The room fell silent, except for the soft shuffle of hymn books closing. I watched the candles flicker near the altar, their small flames trembling in the draught. Behind me someone muttered, "She brought shame where peace should have stayed." Another voice hushed them, but the words lingered. Shame, peace, both used like weapons. Martha sat 3 rows ahead, her phone hidden under her prayer shawl, recording. She didn't look back at me once, but her small nod when the pastor said my name was enough. I knew she'd heard it too. Proof mattered now more than grace. "Some among us," Pastor continued, "seek earthly justice instead of divine patience." His tone softened, but every syllable was meant to slice. "We must not let bitterness corrupt faith. We must pray for restoration." I gripped the edge of the pew until my knuckles went white. The candlelight shimmered on the polished wood, bending with every breath I took. My mother sat across the aisle, eyes fixed on the altar. She didn't move, didn't speak, but her silence roared louder than any accusation. After the service, people lined up for coffee in the church hall. Conversations bloomed like weeds, half-truths spreading faster than the scent of the incense still clinging to my clothes. "She's pushing that case again," one woman whispered. Over money? Another asked. No, over pride. I turned toward them, forcing calm into my voice. Over truth, I said. Their smiles faltered, polite but vacant. Martha joined me outside near the chapel steps. The winter air bit through my coat, sharp and cleansing. I've got it, she said quietly. Every word. He said your name twice. Thank you, I whispered. My breath came out in small white clouds. It's not about him, though. It's about what they believe. They'll believe the recording when they hear it, she said. Her loyalty was steady, though her eyes betrayed worry. You're not just fighting Mark anymore. You're fighting faith itself. Inside, the bells began to ring for the next service. Each chime felt like judgment echoing through stone. By afternoon, the clip had spread, passed hand to hand, message to message. People listened in private, pretending they hadn't. The tone of pity changed to unease. Some avoided me altogether. Others offered fragile apologies wrapped in scripture. That evening, I received a call from Diane. The church board's filed for a review, she said. They're questioning your role on the community committee. I already know, I said. I'm stepping down. Silence on her end. Then, that's wise. Let them fall into their own trap. When I hung up, I lit the small candle Father had once kept by the window. The wax had cracked from age, but it still burned true. I sat beside it, listening to the faint hum of distant traffic mixed with the echo of hymns still looping in my mind. My mother arrived without calling. She didn't sit. She just stood in the doorway, coat still buttoned. You could have stayed quiet, she said. And lived with that? I asked. Her expression didn't change. Faith doesn't ask for truth. It asks for peace. Then maybe I've outgrown peace, I said. She closed the door softly behind her as she left, her perfume mingling with the lingering incense, sweet and suffocating. Later that night, Martha sent me the full audio file, tagged simply as reference R7H2. I played it once, twice. Each repetition burned the pastor's words deeper into my chest until I could recite them from memory. Pray for repentance. Pray for humility. His voice carried the authority of conviction, but no trace of compassion. The next morning, the candle had burned itself down to a puddle of wax. I stared at the hardened remnants, thin curls of smoke still rising in the air. Rumor had replaced grace, and faith had become currency. They prayed for my repentance, not my truth. They tried to sell what wasn't theirs to keep. The county hall smelled of old varnish and paper, century-old walls holding too many echoes of debt and deceit. Rows of folding chairs faced the small wooden stage where the auctioneer stood, his hand already on the gavel. The flyer in my hand was creased from being folded too many times. Its paper felt rough, like sandpaper against my thumb. Estate liquidation, 11 Hunwook a.m. My father's workshop was listed third, between a summer cottage and a rusted pickup. Grace stood beside me, her expression calm, but her eyes fierce. Once it begins, you have 60 seconds to make them stop, she whispered. No one listens longer than that. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Lot number 3. One detached workshop with adjoining land, starting bid at $24,000. My pulse thudded in my ears. I rose from my seat, clutching the document I'd waited 2 months to secure. Stop this, I said, voice cutting through the murmurs. Heads turned. The air changed temperature. That property is under legal dispute. Case reference C-187B. You cannot sell it. A wave of discomfort rippled through the audience. The auctioneer hesitated, hand hovering over the gavel. Ma'am, unless you have official stay orders, this proceeding— I do. I unfolded the stamped notice, the ink still smelling faintly of toner and truth. Filed yesterday morning by the estate court clerk. He took the paper, squinting at the seal, glancing toward the bailiff near the door. For a moment, no one moved. Then Grace stepped forward, voice steady. "You'll want to verify with the judge's office before you commit perjury." Someone in the second row muttered, "She's the one from the church rumors." Another hissed, "This again?" The words slid through the crowd like oil on water, shiny, toxic, unstoppable. The auctioneer set the gavel down. "We'll pause this lot," he said, "pending confirmation." But before relief could settle, a man in a pressed suit rose from the front row, Mark's attorney, the same one who'd smirked through the first hearing. "This is harassment," he said loudly. "The will was clear. She's delaying settlement for personal gain." Grace turned to him. "Then you won't mind the court reviewing your client's forged withdrawals," she said. Her calm was surgical. "4 receipts, totaling $48,500, all signed after the decedent's death. Should I read the dates out loud?" A hush spread. The attorney's face drained color. He adjusted his tie but didn't respond. The clerk at the side door slipped out to make a call. The audience began whispering again, this time softer, uncertain. I stood there, my hands trembling around the edges of the proof, realizing that fear and justice sometimes share the same heartbeat. "Stakes reminder," Grace murmured quietly, almost to herself. "If they sell it, the workshop's gone forever." That line grounded me more than anything. It wasn't just wood and tools. It was the last piece of my father's life untouched by lies. The sawdust smell, the burn marks on the bench, his initials carved in the beam above the door. J.R., 1978. The place had been his confession booth, his prayer. A man from the county office entered, papers in hand. He whispered something to the auctioneer, who nodded once, gravely. "This sale," he announced, "is hereby suspended pending court verification. Any transfer attempts will be considered contempt of process." The crowd reacted. Some clapped softly. Others exhaled relief they didn't understand. The gavel hovered midair as the sound of its own authority faltered. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Grace touched my arm lightly. "You've turned the tide," she said. "Not yet," I replied. "He'll find another way." "Then we'll be ready." As we walked out into the hallway, the winter light flooded through the tall windows, too bright to look at directly. Reporters were already gathering near the entrance, their cameras ready. One called my name, asking if I'd like to comment on the family feud. I kept walking. Let them write their versions. I had evidence, not stories. My phone buzzed. Diane's voice came through, steady but urgent. "The court's confirmed the stay. The hearing's set for next week. Be prepared. It'll be public." "Good," I said. "It's time they see what's real." Outside, a gust of wind caught the flyer still in my hand, tearing it loose. It skittered across the courthouse, steps before landing face down in a puddle. The ink bled instantly, the word auction dissolving into nothing. Behind me, through the open door, the sound came, soft but unmistakable. The crowd clapped when the hammer froze midair. They always come smiling before they print your ruin. The reporter arrived mid-morning, sunlight bouncing off the chrome badge clipped to his jacket. He introduced himself as Tom, a name too easy, too rehearsed. Behind his polite grin, I could already feel the weight of the narrative he'd come to collect, not the truth. His notebook was half open before we even sat down, pen ready like a scalpel. "I just want your side," he said. "They always do," I replied. He chuckled, missing the warning in my tone. The living room felt smaller under his gaze, as if every frame on the wall might confess something I hadn't said yet. Outside, the light was harsh, slicing through the window in unforgiving strips that turned the dust into glare. He asked about the lawsuit first, then about Mark, then, of course, about the letter. His phrasing was clever, designed to sound sympathetic while nudging me toward contradiction. "So, you believe your cousin falsified documents, but the church still supports him?" "I believe," I said carefully, "that faith doesn't erase evidence." He looked up, eyes bright, pen frozen midair. "That's a powerful line. Mind if I quote it?" "I'd rather you understand it." He smiled again, tight, professional. Understanding isn't my job. Accuracy is. That's when I realized he wasn't here to listen. He was here to write me. After he left, the silence settled heavy. I watched the sunlight crawl across the table and fade. By evening, Hale called. His voice carried that low calm that always meant bad news wrapped in precision. He emailed Mark before the interview, he said. I've got the thread. He forwarded it. Reference D42F. Subject line, background confirmation. My stomach turned as I read. She'll likely play the victim. Lean into the inheritance angle. Public love's moral contrast. Mark's story adds credibility. Attached were 2 more messages, both from Mark. One read simply, "Happy to help shape the truth." Shape. The words stuck like ash in my throat. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying to Hale. You said you could trace the origin? Already did. Server logs confirm the timestamps. Then keep it. We'll need it for the complaint. I sat there in the half-dark, the glow from the laptop reflecting against the window glass, my face superimposed over the reporter's smiling profile on his website. Truth against distortion, both trapped in the same pain. The next morning I called Tom. He answered on the second ring, tone lighter than it had any right to be. I've read your messages, I said. A pause. Excuse me? You wrote to Mark. You planned the angle before you ever met me. He exhaled sharply. Look, that's just professional background. Every story needs context. Context isn't collusion. Don't use that word, he snapped. It's not accurate. Neither is your article. For a moment, there was nothing but the hum of the line, and then a quieter voice. This story's already bigger than you think. If I don't write it, someone else will. I almost laughed. Then write it, I said. But remember, truth doesn't stay buried. It waits. That was enough to end the call. By noon, the article went live. The headline read, Grieving Heir Faces Accusations of Greed and Delusion. Below it, a photo of me standing outside the courthouse, cropped so that Grace's hand on my shoulder was just out of frame. I scrolled past the paragraphs, half quotes, half invention, and stopped at the final line. Family fractures are the hardest to mend when pride outweighs forgiveness. They'd made me the villain of my own grief. I printed the article, folded it neatly, and placed it beside Father's will fragments, proof of another theft, not of money, but of narrative. Hale's formal complaint to the press council went out the same evening. He'd included the email thread, the timestamps, and one closing line that made me breathe again. Truth, even delayed, remains undefeated. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose gate against the fence. Each clang felt like punctuation, a reminder that silence could be weaponized too. When night came, I sat at Father's desk, tracing the ink where his name had once been forged, the shadows from the desk lamp falling over the newspaper print. For all their words, they couldn't touch that. His handwriting, still steady, still real. And then it hit me. The cruel symmetry. My father's name hit headlines he never earned. I let his voice fill the courthouse. The air was heavy, charged with whispers and the faint hum of microphones warming under the lights. The judge's gavel had not yet struck, but silence ruled the room already. I stood at the podium, fingers pressed against the envelope that had waited 15 years to be opened. My father's handwriting, looping and careful, stared back at me. The arbiter gave a single nod. You may proceed. I broke the seal. Paper rasped against paper, dry and delicate, the sound echoing through the wood-paneled chamber like the unwrapping of a wound. My voice trembled on the first line, but steadied as memory took over. If this reaches you, it means the truth was buried deeper than I ever intended. Murmurs stirred among the benches. I read on, slower, the words pulling me between guilt and relief. Mark's debts exceeded $48,500. I moved assets, under my own authorization, to shield her from the collapse I foresaw. The transfers were lawful, the intention protective. Let no one call her a thief for my choices. A gasp rippled through the back rows. Someone whispered, "He admitted it." The judge lifted her hand for quiet, but the silence that followed wasn't obedience. It was awe. Grace, seated behind the defense table, caught my eye and mouthed, "Steady." I inhaled and kept reading. My father's words grew softer near the end, almost confessional. "If blood must be the price for love, then let mine pay it." My throat burned. I folded the letter once, carefully, as though it might break apart if touched wrong. For a moment, the only sound was the low hum of the courtroom fan and the faint echo of my father's voice lingering in the air. The arbiter rose and presented the hearing record, reference H29C, time-stamped and signed by the estate clerk. "The document authenticity is confirmed," she announced. "Handwriting verified, witnessed by 2 prior notaries." Mark's attorney stood abruptly. "This is emotional manipulation. That letter isn't a legal transfer." Grace's voice cut through before I could speak. "It's not meant to be. It's an admission, and it's evidence." The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Dawson, unless you wish to challenge handwriting verification, sit down." He hesitated, then obeyed. I turned back to the microphone. My voice was lower now, calmer. "He wasn't protecting money," I said. "He was protecting legacy. That's what you tried to erase." Mark shifted in his chair, jaw tight, sweat collecting at his collar. The cameras from the press section glimmered in the back, lenses catching every twitch, every tremor. One reporter whispered, "This changes everything." It did. The arbiter handed the original letter to the court clerk for sealing. I could see her lips moving silently as she read a line to herself, her expression softening just enough to remind me that even institutions have hearts. When the judge finally spoke, her tone carried the weight of formality, but the words hit like release. The court acknowledges the document as valid proof of intent. The estate proceedings will pause pending adjustment review. Gasps turned to applause before anyone could stop them. The gavel struck once. "Order," she said, though her voice betrayed a hint of mercy. I felt my knees weaken as Grace steadied my arm. "You did it," she whispered. "No," I said. "He did. He finally spoke." Through the microphone's faint buzz, I could still hear the echo of my father's words, alive again in the space that had once condemned me. I looked down at the table where the letter lay beside the transcript. 2 worlds colliding, paper and proof, love and legality. Mark stood then, sudden and furious. "You all believe this?" His voice cracked. "He lied to save her. She forged—" "Enough," the judge warned. He slammed his fist on the— "No, I'll prove it." The bailiff moved closer. The microphones caught the static of his rage as he shouted one last time, louder than truth, smaller than justice. Then, with a single motion from the arbiter, his mic was cut. The silence that followed was absolute, sacred, and final. Mark shouted before they silenced his mic. "No witness hides when truth drips in daylight." By morning, the courthouse felt different, charged, humid, alive with the quiet rustle of consequence. The same benches that once trembled under gossip now held a crowd waiting for blood, or maybe justice. I could smell the moisture on the air, a heaviness that clung to every word before it was spoken. Martha sat at the witness stand, her hands folded neatly over a sworn statement marked Reference S31D. Her gray hair was pinned back, her composure absolute. For a moment, she looked like someone carved out of restraint. The judge leaned forward. "You may begin." Her voice was steady, stripped of fear. "I was present on March 12th, she said. "I heard Mark tell his associate that the checks were handled. His word was handled. He said he'd made sure the signatures matched, and no one would question what was already paid." A low hum rolled through the courtroom. The judge's pen froze midair. My breath caught. "Did he say whose signature?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes." He said, and I quote, "Father's hand doesn't matter when the pen's in mine." The sound that followed wasn't noise. It was the collapse of a man's defense. Mark's jaw tightened, his hands clenching against the table. Grace leaned toward me, whispering, "He's unraveling." I nodded. He always thought guilt couldn't echo, but it does. Mark stood abruptly. "She's lying. She's been against me from the start." The judge lifted her hand. "Sit down, Mr. Dawson." He didn't. "She's twisting everything. I was settling debts, not forging—" "Enough," came the firm reply. The gavel struck once, sharp against the wood. The sound cut through his protest, leaving only the faint ring of justice catching its breath. Martha continued, unshaken. "He mentioned 4 checks. I recognized the amounts because I kept the ledgers for the church accounts. Each withdrawal was under $12,000. Total, $48,500. He bragged that no one would trace it back because grief made people blind." That sentence landed like a confession wrapped in someone else's voice. I could feel my pulse in my ears. The prosecutor lifted the document from the table. "Your Honor, we request that this statement be entered as formal evidence. Verification under Code 8F has been completed by the notary." The judge nodded. "Admitted?" Mark's attorney whispered frantically, but the words meant nothing anymore. The truth had already changed shape. It had become proof. Martha looked toward me as she stepped down from the stand. Her eyes said everything no verdict could. "It's over. But justice isn't a clean line. It's a ripple." The bailiff handed the judge a secondary notice from the forensic division. She scanned it, lips tightening. "Mr. Dawson, this court will recess to consider a warrant for seizure of personal effects relevant to the investigation." "What does that mean?" he demanded. "It means your possessions will be inspected for corroborating evidence." He went pale. I saw his gaze drop to the gold watch on his wrist, the same one Father had worn, the one Mark took after the funeral claiming it was a keepsake. His hand twitched, almost defensively, as if he could hide time itself. The judge gestured toward the bailiff. "Confiscate the item for documentation." Mark stepped back. "You can't take this!" The bailiff didn't argue. The clasp snapped open with a click too loud for such a small sound. The watch glinted under the overhead light, its reflection catching the window beside the bench. For a heartbeat, it looked like sunlight breaking through storm glass. Grace exhaled beside me, voice barely above a whisper. "He's finished." I didn't answer. My chest felt tight. Not triumphant, not even relieved, just emptied. The thing about justice is that it doesn't give back what was lost. It only stops the taking. The judge spoke again. "We'll reconvene tomorrow. The court acknowledges the sworn statement and will proceed toward formal charges." As the crowd stirred, I watched the officers escort Mark out, the chain of his own choices now visible, literal. People began murmuring, some sympathetic, others scandalized, but for the first time, their voices didn't hurt. They sounded human. Outside, the rain had begun again, faint but steady, washing the courthouse steps clean. I followed Grace toward the door, the echoes of the gavel still pulsing in my mind. When I glanced back, I saw it. The bailiff setting the watch down beside the evidence ledger, its ticking faint but steady. They took his watch as evidence. Even numbers can tremble under guilt. The courtroom smelled of dust and ink, the scent of endings dressed as formality. A single candle flickered near the clerk's desk, symbolic, the judge had said, for transparency. But the truth was that its trembling light only made the shadows more honest. The accountant took the stand with a quiet authority that no emotion could breach. He placed a folder on the rail, its pages creased, corners folded from too many hands and too much waiting. "The financial audit is complete," he said. "Every dollar has been traced." Grace stood beside me, steady as always, her calm carrying me when my own breath faltered. The judge nodded for him to continue. "The total restitution ordered was $48,500, he said. "Paid in full as of last week. All transfers have been reversed to the estate's main account." The number hit the room like a confession translated into math. No one spoke. Even the air paused. Mark sat in the front row, shoulders slumped, gaze fixed on the floor. His silence was louder than any argument he'd ever made. I thought of the ledger, its thick spine, its pages once filled by Father's careful handwriting, now marred by falsified entries. It lay open on the evidence table, the ink faded where truth had rubbed against deceit. Grace whispered, "You're free now." "Am I?" I asked quietly. "Or just emptied out?" She didn't answer, and maybe she didn't need to. Freedom often comes disguised as aftermath. The accountant adjusted his glasses. We also verified that all forged signatures matched the defendant's known handwriting samples. Cross-examined under reference A19H, no inconsistencies found. A murmur spread through the gallery, muted awe, maybe pity. The judge raised her hand, restoring stillness. "The court recognizes the audit summary as conclusive," she said. "Case closed with restitution confirmed. Official closure recorded." Her gavel struck once. A single echo filled the space, trailing off like the last tick of a broken clock. For a moment, no one moved. The candle flame wavered, then steadied. Grace leaned closer. "This is it," I nodded. "I know." The clerk began gathering documents, stacking them neatly, like memories sealed in evidence. When she reached for the ledger, she hesitated. "Would you like this returned to you?" I looked at it. The creased pages, the faded ink, the faint scent of old paper and time. "No," I said. "Let it stay. It belongs to the record now." Mark's attorney whispered something to him, but he didn't respond. His hands rested flat on the table, palms open, defeated. The judge spoke again, this time softer. "This court acknowledges that financial justice cannot restore emotional loss, but restitution has been met." It wasn't comfort, but it was truth. I gathered my things slowly, the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above blending with the rhythm of shuffling papers and subdued voices. As I turned to leave, the window beside the bench caught the late afternoon sun. Dust motes floated through the light like suspended absolution. Grace followed me into the corridor. The marble tiles were cold underfoot, echoing each step. Reporters waited by the door, their cameras poised, their faces hungry for quotes. One of them called out, "Do you forgive him?" The question lingered, intrusive and tender all at once. I didn't answer. Outside, the city noise felt foreign, too alive for the stillness I carried. Cars passed, conversations drifted, but everything sounded far away. Grace exhaled, a small sound that pulled me back. "They'll write whatever they want," she said. "I know." I glanced back at the courthouse. "But maybe, for once, the numbers won't lie." We walked toward the steps. I could still feel the candle's warmth in my mind, faint but real. The smallest proof that light could survive even here. Halfway down, a clerk called after me. "Ma'am, one question. Do you wish to receive his written apology?" I stopped. The wind brushed against my face, carrying the faint scent of paper and wax. They asked if I wanted his apology. Redemption doesn't trend for long. By morning, the sky outside the kitchen window had the pale stillness of recovery, light without warmth. I sat at the table, coffee gone cold, the silence thick enough to feel earned. My phone buzzed once, then stopped. No calls, no noise, just one message from Hale. The link read, "Correction notice. Truth settles eventually." I clicked it anyway. The headline was small, polite, like it had nowhere to hide but didn't want to be seen either. Earlier reporting on the Dawson estate proceedings contained inaccuracies. That's how they put it. Contained inaccuracies. A phrase so careful it could have passed for apology or avoidance, depending on how you tilted your head. I read it once, then twice. Each line pulled me backward through the storm that started with their first story. The photo they'd stolen, the names they'd twisted, the sympathy they'd auctioned off for views. Now, 3 paragraphs in, they wrote what they should have said months ago. Financial misconduct claims were found false. All assets reinstated. No evidence of intent to defraud. We regret any distress caused. 4 sentences. That's all it took to bury the fire they'd lit. I leaned back in the chair, the wood pressing against my spine, and let the glow from the screen fade as the sun rose outside. The morning light poured through the glass in pale streaks, soft but uninvited. It illuminated the folded newspaper on the counter, the old headlines still screaming in bold black print. Family fortune scandal. Funny how lies shout and truth whispers. Grace had called earlier, voice warm with relief. "You're free," she'd said. "It's over now." But over is a strange word. It doesn't clean the ashes, it just marks where the fire stopped burning. The article ended with one last note. Public faith in the estate's integrity has been restored. Restored. The word tasted hollow. Faith can't be restored. It only reforms, quieter, smaller. I closed the laptop. The sound of the hinge felt final, like the shutting of a door I'd been standing in too long. The gate outside creaked when the mail carrier passed. A small bundle slid through the slot, an envelope, light enough to seem harmless. I didn't open it. I'd learned by now that not all letters deserve to be read. Hale texted again. Press Council issued the correction officially. You can sue for damages if you want. Stared at the message, the glow fading against the morning sun. My thumb hovered over the reply field, then fell away. "No," I whispered. "Let silence do the rest." I stood and walked toward the window. Outside, the world looked washed clean. Pavement damp, air still, leaves trembling with leftover rain. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once, then quieted. Ordinary life, returning like a visitor who'd lost her way. On the counter sat the old wedding ring I'd stopped wearing when the trial began. I picked it up, turning it in the light. It had dulled over the months, the shine replaced by a faint patina that somehow felt honest. Grace had told me once, "Peace doesn't arrive with applause. It just sits beside you one morning, waiting to be noticed." She was right. I placed the ring in the drawer beside Father's letter and the sealed court transcript. Artifacts of a war finally concluded. No trophies, no triumphs, just proof that truth survived long enough to outlast the noise. Outside, a newspaper fluttered across the street, caught in a gust, tumbling end over end until it landed face down in a puddle. The ink blurred into gray. That's how stories end, I thought. Not with fire, but with water. I took a slow breath and turned away from the window, the quiet wrapping itself around me like something earned, not gifted. Peace arrived like mail with no return. Silence became furniture in every room. After the court, the noise drained from my life so completely that even the creak of the front door sounded foreign. The house felt older now, the kind of quiet that remembers too much. Dust lingered on the chairs, soft as regret. I opened a window, and the faint scent of earth rose through the still air, mixing with the ghost of lavender that once perfumed the hall. Weeks had passed since the judgment, yet time inside these walls moved differently, slower, cautious, as if afraid to disturb what had been buried. I moved from room to room, touching surfaces that had survived us all. The lamp on the corner table, the photograph of Father half faded from the sun, the single cup I'd left untouched since that morning when truth had split our family apart. Grace arrived mid-afternoon, her knock gentle, as if testing whether the house still allowed visitors. "You're still here," she said softly. "For now," I answered. "It feels unfinished." We stood in the doorway before she set the basket down. Bread, tea leaves, a single candle, her quiet way of reminding me that life, too, must be maintained. "I brought the renewal papers," she added. "Workshop permit. You'll need to sign before month's end." I smiled faintly. "It's strange to rebuild the same place that broke us." She shrugged. "Maybe rebuilding is the only way to forgive it."
Her words stayed with me as we brewed tea. The scent of it, sharp and familiar, cut through the
stillness, pulling the house a little closer to the present. We sat near the window where sunlight stretched in thin, slanted ribbons across the floor. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It had softened into understanding. "I read your name in the Gazette," she said. "The correction was printed." "I know." I traced the rim of my cup. "But I didn't keep the paper. I think I'm done collecting noise." Grace smiled, the kind of smile that ends a conversation rather than begins one. She reached for the teapot, refilled both cups, then looked around the room. "You've kept everything," she said. "Not everything," I replied. "Just what tells the truth." After she left, the light faded slowly, turning gold, then gray. I found myself walking toward Father's old study. The smell of dust was stronger there, like the air had forgotten how to move. I opened the drawer and pulled out the small diary I'd started after the trial, a plain brown cover, pages rough at the edges. I sat in his old chair, the wood still firm, the cushions sunken just enough to remember him. My pen hovered before I began to write. The measure of love isn't what we inherit, it's what we choose to keep when the world takes everything else. The words came slower after that, as if the ink itself carried weight. I wrote about the lessons learned, the faces that had shifted, the strange mercy of truth when it finally arrives. I wrote about Mark, not his guilt, but his silence. And I wrote about Grace, whose steadiness had saved me more times than she'd ever admit. Outside, the first stars appeared. Their light seeped through the curtains, thin and unassuming. I closed the diary, the pages still smelling faintly of dust and ink, scent enough to remind me that memory lives not in what's perfect, but in what endures. On the desk, the workshop permit lay unsigned. I reached for it, the paper coarse beneath my fingers. A small signature, a single gesture, would make it official. The workshop Father built could reopen, not as a monument to grief, but as proof of continuity. I set the pen down, then paused. Some things deserve a moment before being reborn. The clock ticked softly, one of the few sounds left untouched by the years. I turned toward the doorway, watching the shape of the chair in the dim light, sturdy and waiting. The air held its breath, as though expecting one last word. I whispered instead, "I'll begin again tomorrow." The quiet didn't answer. It simply settled around me, steady and forgiving. His tools still remember my hands. The roses return without permission each spring. They grow wild now, curling through the cracks in the old gate, as if memory itself had taken root. Morning light spills across the headstones, soft and forgiving, the kind of light that hides more than it reveals. I stand in the garden Father planted, the soil dark and heavy beneath my shoes. Every petal that opens feels like an apology I never asked for but somehow needed. The town sent their permission for this space months ago, an official garden permit sealed and signed. Arbiter brought it himself, the same lawyer who once stood at the courtroom podium, now holding a simple envelope instead of a verdict. "It's official," he said, offering a faint smile. "The property is yours again, restored without conditions." Restored. The word carried the weight of every night I'd spent questioning whether justice ever truly closes. I thanked him quietly. "Tell them I'm grateful," I said. He nodded, then paused. "You know, forgiveness doesn't have to mean forgetting." "I know," I replied. "It just means I can stop counting what was taken." He left soon after, his footsteps fading down the gravel path until the silence filled back in around me. The breeze shifted. I caught the faint scent of roses, sharp, earthy, clean. The smell pulled me backward through time, to summers before betrayal, to laughter that echoed from these same steps, to the day Father taught me how to prune without hurting the bloom. The community gathered later that afternoon, a quiet handful of neighbors and workers, each holding something to offer: water, a prayer, a single stem. They didn't speak much. Grief had worn us all thin, and there are moments when even kindness feels too loud. Grace stood beside me, her hands folded. She leaned in and whispered, "You should say something." So I did. "I once believed truth would break everything," I began. "That when it finally arrived, there would be nothing left standing. But standing here now, I see that truth doesn't destroy. It clears the soil for something new." No applause, no murmurs, just the soft sound of the wind brushing past the roses. I knelt and pressed my hand against the cool earth above his name. The stone felt steady, unbothered by the years. "I forgive you," I said, the words landing like small seeds in the soil. Grace placed her hand on my shoulder. "That's enough," she whispered. The arbiter returned briefly, holding a thin document, final confirmation from the local record office. "Proof response complete," he said. "The estate and garden are legally reconciled." He hesitated, eyes flicking toward the crowd. "Would you like it filed publicly or kept sealed?" "Sealed," I answered. "Let the truth live quietly now." He folded the document carefully and tucked it into his case. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked almost at peace. "Then it's done," he said, and left me to the quiet. The sun dipped lower, the light softening to a golden haze. The roses shimmered, their color deepening under the glow. A few petals fell and landed on my shoes, small, delicate proofs that even beauty must shed something to continue. The townspeople began to leave in silence, one by one, the gate creaking each time it opened. Grace lingered behind, her eyes wet but kind. "You did it," she said. "You carried it all the way to the end." I smiled faintly. "No," I said. "It carried me." We stood there until the last shadow stretched across the stone. The garden had grown untamed, but I couldn't bring myself to trim it. Some things deserve to be wild, especially forgiveness. I turned toward the gate, the sound of its hinges soft, almost tender. The evening air held a calm I hadn't felt in years, a peace that didn't demand silence, but offered it freely. Before I left, I reached down and plucked one rose. Its stem was still warm from the sun, the petals unfolding like breath. I walked back to the headstone, placed the bloom gently above his name, and whispered, "You can rest now." I left one bloom on his stone. He wrote, "Keep the house safe." I finally did. The words play through the small speaker on my desk, the old voice memo flickering with a faint static hiss, as though time itself is breathing between syllables. I recorded this same message years ago when the house felt more like a wound than a home. Now it sounds like a promise fulfilled. The afternoon sun pours through the windows in long golden ribbons, the light touching the same walls that once absorbed our shouting, our silence, our fear. I sit at Father's desk, my desk now. It's wood polished, smooth again after years of disuse. Outside, the roses are in bloom. I can see their reflections swaying on the glass, like ghosts that learned to dance instead of haunt. The recorder clicks softly. My own voice fills the room. "This is entry reference 7C1A, final testimony for archival record, estate verified." The digital timestamp blinks at the corner of the screen. Every second it counts feels like a heartbeat, reminding me that the story has weight, that truth, when spoken aloud, turns memory into record. I pause the playback halfway and whisper, "He really did say it." The words he left behind still vibrate in my bones. Keep the house safe. Back then, I thought he meant the bricks, the walls, the inheritance. But now I know he meant something smaller, something heavier, our name, our dignity, our quiet right to exist without shame. The window glass hums faintly as the breeze shifts. The scent of wood polish mixes with the faint sweetness of roses carried in through the cracks. I press record again and continue. "I've kept the house," I say into the microphone, my tone steady but softer than I expected. "I've kept the truth, the history, and every lesson written between the lies." I stop and exhale. Across the room, sunlight lands on the framed document from the Historical Society, the formal proof that my story, our story, will outlive rumor. Beneath the seal, the curator's signature confirms it. Voice archive accepted, record stored. One line below, in small print, preservation, permanent. Permanent. It feels different from closure. Closure ends. Permanence continues. Grace had called earlier to remind me to submit the final file before dusk. "You'll want the light right," she'd said. "The golden hour does wonders for truth." I'd laughed, thinking how she always managed to make paperwork sound poetic. I press record again. This entry marks the end of the Dawson ledger. Official restitution completed. Estate secured. Legacy intact. I let the silence that follows linger just long enough to breathe. Then I add, quieter, "He asked me to protect what he built. I did." For a moment, the only sound is the faint click of the ceiling fan. It circles slowly, steady as time itself. The light catches the dust motes in the air, turning them to gold, small floating reminders that even decay can shimmer when the sun hits it right. I think of Mark. I think of the years spent tangled in his lies, the courtroom, the letters, the way silence once felt like defeat. Now silence feels earned, soft, not empty. The house creaks slightly, the way it always does at dusk. Its bones remember everything, but its walls no longer ache. I reach for the envelope still pinned under the paperweight, Father's last letter, the one that started all of this. The ink has faded, but the line endures. "Keep the house safe." I smile, tracing the letters with my thumb. "I kept it," I say aloud. "I kept us." Outside, the sky bleeds gold into blue. The roses tilt toward the last of the light. I upload the audio file to the archive, labeling it exactly as the form required. Reference 7C1A, verified voice record. A small notification appears on the screen. Transfer complete. The sunbeam shifts, sliding across the floor until it rests against the base of the door. For a heartbeat, it looks like the house itself is bowing to the day's end. I close the laptop. The click echoes softly through the room, a punctuation mark to everything that came before. I stand, one hand on the doorway, and glance back once more at the desk, the recorder, the quiet. The house hums with the weight of survival, its silence no longer haunted, only whole. Some promises outlive their keepers.